I want to acknowledge there's three other champions for this issue standing behind us, members of Congress. You have Representatives Fallon and Dr. Babb and Randy Weber. And they are here because they represent the state of Texas, and this is an unprecedented, clear, and present danger in the state of Texas. But they will be the first to tell you, and we will attest, and all of us will tell you, this is not just a Texas issue. Every state is a border state now. And I'll take a couple of questions, but I want to acknowledge one thing very important at the outset, because people ask us all the time, why hasn't Congress been able to close the border? You may have noticed in the House we've been working on it every single day since the Republicans took control of this Congress in this term. We have passed H.R. 2, our signature Secure the Border Act, which would be the most comprehensive border reform and border security act in generations, probably ever. And we passed it now 14 months ago. It is sitting on Senator Schumer's desk in the Democrat-controlled Senate. We passed resolution after resolution. We impeached Mayorkas, the Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security. Why? Why the first cabinet secretary impeachment in the history of the United States? Because it's that bad. And desperate times call for desperate measures. But you saw what happened to the House doing our constitutional duty. It got quickly dispensed with in the Senate. No impeachment over there. They didn't convict him of that. They tried to brush it off. Every single thing that we have done, and we fight for it every single day, and you'll continue to see us fight for it. This is one of the measures to try to take care of this catastrophe that the Biden administration and Mayorkas have engineered and done by design. The answer ultimately to the question of why Congress can't close the border is because we don't have the authority. Even if H.R. 2 was to be passed in the Senate and signed into law by President Biden, we all know they would not enforce it. They do not enforce existing federal law. The federal immigration law is ignored. It is flouted on a daily basis. That is why the election cycle is so critically important. That is why you must elect a president like Donald J. Trump who will close the border. But between now and then, Congress has an affirmative obligation, a constitutional responsibility under Article 1, Section 4 to take care of this problem. And the SAVE Act is one of the most immediate and urgent things that we can do. That's why we're here. That's why we're going to push this aggressively, and that's why we'll get everybody on record on whether they agree with the sentiments that have been expressed today. You have a few questions, we'll take them. No. So, Aisha, on the first question, I mean, the answer is that it's unanswerable. That is the problem. States are not allowed right now to prove if somebody claims on that simple form that they're a citizen, they can vote. They're not allowed to prove whether it's true or not. We all know intuitively that a lot of illegals are voting in federal elections, but it's not been something that is easily provable. We don't have that number. This legislation will allow us to do exactly that. It will prevent that from happening, and if someone tries to do it, it will now be unlawful, and the states will have a mechanism to prove whether they are or not. And to suggest that this is some sort of revenge tour is kind of a silly notion. What we are doing, and what we explained here over and over, is that we have a constitutional responsibility. We have an obligation to the people that we are elected to represent, to every citizen in this country, to ensure that our elections are secure. That should not be, as was said earlier, a Republican issue or a Democrat issue. It should not be partisan. 85 or 86% of Americans agree that this is something that should be a top priority, and those who haven't answered conclusively on that poll haven't yet paid attention to it. I think they will soon, and we're trying to avert an absolute disaster, and this is a responsible measure for us to take. Other questions? What we're talking about today is the 2024 election. Nobody can go back and relitigate what happened in 2020. We know that there was ballot harvesting. We know that there was mail-in ballots. It was the COVID election. There was all sorts of irregularity occasioned by the pandemic, where states haphazardly put together new laws and opened up the systems and led to all sorts of confusion and chaos and concern that lingers even to today. So what Congress has a responsibility to do is take care of that problem. We are supposed to step into this breach and fill it with responsible legislation. That's what this is. That's what the American people demand and deserve, and that's what we're going to do. That's why we're here today. One more question, Scott? Scott, this is not a messaging bill. This is one of the most substantive, as Senator Lee said, one of the most important pieces of legislation that we'll be presented with in our lifetime, in our congressional careers. This is at the essence of what it means to have a constitutional republic. If the people cannot rely upon their election system, the integrity of that system, then we have nothing. We have to do this, and so we'll do it out of the House, and we'll send it to the Senate, and we'll let Chuck Schumer decide whether he agrees with that sentiment or not. We're not doing this for messaging purposes. Yeah, Chip.
I'll let Mike answer that real quick. But Scott, look, this is not a messaging exercise. The American people want this. And I think one question you should ask yourself: if we put on the floor of the floor of the House, a bill that would put into law existing law, the existing law which requires only citizens to vote, do you think our House colleagues today would support that? It was bipartisan in the past. But this is the question. The Democrats in the Senate and our Democratic colleagues in the House, they don't want it. This is going to be a clear delineation. The American people overwhelmingly on a bipartisan basis want us to ensure that only citizens vote. Current law says that. But the fact is there are numerous states who want to work in opposition to that. Like, look in Arizona right now. Arizona's law currently has two different systems because federal law prohibits them from checking citizenship. They require citizenship for their state elections. We're trying to make sure we straighten that out, get the federal government out of the way to allow states to do it, but go a step further to say that for federal elections, for the President of the United States and for Congress, where we have the clear congressional authority to do so, to simply require it. That is not an objectionable thing for us to do. So if it doesn't get passed through the Senate, it will be because Democrats are making a very clear statement, like my friend Stephen Miller said, that they don't believe in that principle. This is very simple. Should only citizens vote in the United States of America in federal elections? We're going to call the question, and we'll see where they land.
I'd like to just address this briefly since my chamber of Congress has been mentioned. I'd like to know the basis for the assumption built into your question that this will not pass the Senate. I would love to know what your basis is. And of course, you don't know that. You can't know that. We won't know that unless or until we try to do that. This is not some kind of Rube Goldberg design trap. This is not a fancy piece of legislation. Congressman Roy and I have written this thing to be very narrow, to be very narrowly tailored, respecting the sovereignty of the states. It applies specifically to federal voter election rolls, those eligible to vote in federal elections. It is very simple. It is elegant in what it does. And so I really would like to know what your basis for assuming that it will go nowhere in the Senate, which would mean that no Democrats wanted to support it, or an insufficient number of Democrats would support it, and most or all of them would oppose it, such that it couldn't come up for a vote, and that if it somehow did, that it would fail. I'd also like to push back on what their argument would be. This is why I understand the premise of the question, because it doesn't seem like a Democratic priority. Otherwise, it would be, and we'd all know about it. But it begs the question: when we try to push this up for a vote, whether attached as an amendment to another piece of legislation, or through unanimous consent, trying to set up a vote for it or something else, if you are proven correct in the end that Democrats oppose it, on what basis would they oppose it? Do any of them have a stated objective of undoing existing federal law, making it unlawful, making it criminal for a non-citizen, especially an illegal alien, from voting in a U.S. election, in a U.S. federal election? Surely they're not disputing that that's the law. I'm not aware of any of them trying to undo that law, saying that that law is a miscarriage of justice. So if they're not trying to undo that law, but they oppose this law, what does that mean? I'll tell you exactly what it means. It's that they're just fine if that's the position they take in this. And I honestly don't think the script has been written on this yet. I'm not willing to assume that all of, or most of, or even the majority of my Democratic colleagues are content with that being dead letter law. I'd like to see them explain that position to their constituents. I'm familiar with very, very few of them who could or would do so with a straight face and thereafter expect to be voted back into office, having taken that truly, extraordinarily, obscenely extreme position. Look, this is so fundamental to who we are as a country, to our ability to operate, that there is no valid basis upon which you could oppose this. It would be insane. Nats Field, just a few blocks away from here. If you want to go to a Washington Nationals game, you're going to have to go through a ticket taker, through a turnstile, who will take your ticket. Those lines, those seats inside, they're reserved for ticket holders only. If they just started assuming that somebody with a wink and a nod, having signed a piece of paper saying, yeah, I've got tickets, could go to the game, the whole experience at Nats Field would be very different indeed. Of course, nobody in the real world operates that way. The United States government, when determining who should occupy these seats of our own government, should be no less rigorous, no less vigilant in making sure that the right people are getting in and the right people are choosing who gets to occupy these positions than they are at Nats Field, at Busch Gardens, at Disneyland, or anywhere else. Thanks.
I don't know why it wouldn't pass in the Senate. 87% of Americans agree that we should require proof of citizenship to register to vote in this country. And that includes 82% of people who approve of President Biden and 76% of people who identify as Democrats. This is a bipartisan issue. This is an American issue. And I don't understand why we would assume automatically that it won't pass and that Congress won't do what's right for the American people. We have a man who is here today who is a naturalized citizen, and he supports requiring proof of citizenship to register to vote. And I've talked to immigrants who are here legally who also support proof of citizenship to register to vote, some who have become citizens and some who have not. This issue crosses the political divide, and very few things do that in this sharply divided country today. Why can't Congress do what's right for America for once and quit being so dysfunctional?
Thank you for your time today. Thanks for all these champions for election security. The SAVE Act is a very important measure, as we've announced, and it's going to not only save the integrity of our election system, but help us save America. Thanks for being here today.